continuación, entramos a la sesión de preguntas y respuestas, en la cual contaremos con la presencia de la doctora Amanda Bradbury y también del doctor Carlos Eduardo Wayne, quienes nos acompañarán en la sesión. Welcome back, Dr. Bradbury.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. Dr. Noguera, welcome to the questions and answers section. I'm pretty sure that this section is going to be very productive for everyone that is listening in all the different countries and all the different states in Mexico. Dr. Bradbury, are you okay if I start with the questions that are the people that are in the chat asked for you?
Certainly.
Perfect. Okay, the first question that I have is there a way to use fetal programming in our favor? Because we mainly focus on what the negative effects are. Is there a way to use it on our behalf or to improve our athletes?
Yeah, that's an excellent question, and something that you certainly have to think about as a researcher. And most of our fetal programming work has looked at the negative implications of developmental programming, but you can also spin that to look at it the other way, where when we feed the control diets in our studies, we find that those animals are the healthiest of the options, supporting that our current nutrient requirements for mares at the various stages of gestation are probably pretty close to what they should be to meet those nutrient requirements to develop a foal that will perform optimally for whatever we want that animal to perform for later in life. So while I agree we do most of our work to determine the implications of malnutrition, at the same time, we're still learning what's optimal as well.
Perfect. Thank you very much. I'm going to ask each one of you a question. So I'm going to ask Dr. Wayne one of his questions. One of our listeners asked if you have found a correlation between the insulin status of the mare and the weight gain after birth or immediately after birth in the Criollo breed.
We didn't have any relation about the insulin in the gestation to the growth of the foals after the foaling.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Wayne. Dr. Bradbury, in your research, did you look at the type of feed, so the ingredients of the feed, whether it was a commercial feed or something that they prepared in-house, if they had any direct relation to the muscle fiber type, considering that you might have a heavy horse or mare on one farm compared to the other ones that you looked at?
So we haven't made it quite that far yet in fetal programming research in horses. I will say other species have made it this far in looking at the various sources of energy, whether it comes predominantly from carbohydrates or fats, whether there's independent effects of excess or restricted protein. We just haven't quite made it that far yet. What our research has focused on up to this point is what's most applicable to the industry, and we start figuring out those effects, and then we can kind of piecemeal those nutrients out and figure out what the individual effects are. So our work so far has been all on commercial feeds. So all the horses on the studies we've done so far have received the same forage source, whether they're on the control diet or the overfed diet. And then those horses that are on the overfed diet receive an additional concentrate source as well. What we actually did when we improved those dietary treatments later on in that second study, where we got a lot of really nice data from, is both groups received a high quality forage source as well as a commercial forage balancer, which is high in protein and fills those micronutrient gaps that are typically there on a hay only diet. And then the overfed group received an additional source of concentrate that's your standard commercial mare and foal feed. And so I do think it would be an appropriate and necessary next step to start piecing out those individual nutrients. The problem with that, though, is in equine nutrition, horses require a specific nutrient to calorie ratio. So every time we increase energy in the diet, we also need to increase the protein content. Otherwise, we're going to default to a protein restriction. And that can make the analyses a little bit more challenging. Are the effects coming from an excess of energy, or is it from us not maintaining that nutrient to calorie ratio and ending up with a protein deficiency?
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Bradbury. Dr. Wayne, did you find a correlation in Criollo's height of the falls at 30 days that a lot of the researchers have found to be correlated to orthopedic abnormalities in your breed?
Yeah, in the more growth falls, you have more problem. And the Criollo's horse, it's so normal. The biggest chest and the toes in the first days, and when the foals growing for the first and the second month, put the hands in. In this case, is so bad for the continuous in the foal's life for the training in the future. The high growth in the first weeks and the first and the second month, it's directly in correlation for these problems.
Thank you very much, Dr. Wayne. Something related to this question as well from our listeners. What is the question? Well, what do you do in Brazil? Because the pictures that you showed show that your pastures are very lush, and you had grasses all the way up to the hocks of the horses. How would you control that to prevent having overweight horses? Or is there any management that you do with the horses to prevent the mares from getting overweight?
This condition is in South Brazil, near Rio Grande do Sul, in our state, in Santa Catarina, and Paraná, the three South states in Brazil. And like a Pampa in Argentina, Uruguay, likes the same, because here in the winter we cultivate a lot of grass to better in the pasture, and in the spring and go to the summer, we have a good natural grasses, and the mares growing in the weight and get fat. It's a normal here, and the breeders put the new grasses in the field, and you need put the horse in the field that we cut, or you put the bovine or the cattle with the horse to cut the grass for better situation in the management. It's a big challenge, because we have a big situations of difference the other states, and the other problem that in the Criollos competition in South America, the breeders put the foals in a barns from 2 or 3 months until a year. In this case, the foals receive sweet food, and it's one more problem.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Wayne. Dr. Bradbury, I have two very interesting questions for you that are advocating a little bit for your foresight in the next couple years to decades in the research that you're doing. The first one is, how would you formulate a diet for a pregnant mare in a breeding farm? First, would you recommend that in the next years we're going to move towards a more general diet for the farm to a more individualized feeding, or do you think that we will still have general recommendations for an area or a country?
That's an excellent question. I think we move in the direction, or try to move in the direction always, of feeding horses individually. But with that said, that's not always practical for most facilities. So, apologize. That's not always, that doesn't always work for all production systems. So for that reason, I think we need to cater to people with both production systems, whether they are wanting to feed their animals individually or wanting to feed their animals in a group fed situation. And I think we can certainly manage horses appropriately either way. And I do think that's an important area of research to figure out as well. All of our nutrient requirements currently are based on individual animal, but we do still tend to feed animals in a group setting. But with that said, I think most farms, whether they're feeding animals individually or feeding animals in a group setting, can probably meet those nutrient requirements for their horses using or purchasing only a single commercial feed product, or maybe one or two that they have on their farm to support all the animals that they have there. And the differences would then be in the volume of that feed that's being supplemented to horses individually, or housing horses if they're going to be in a group fed setting based off of similar nutrient requirements with them. So if you have hard keepers, keep those hard keepers together. If you have easy keepers, keep those easy keepers together. We do need to do a better job, I think, of putting together recommendations for those various different production systems, whether it's grouped, housed, or individually fed.
And the second question that is very well related to this question is, do you think in the future we'll have a special feeding protocol or feeding regime depending on what we want this horse to be performing in the future? And do you think this will come, as you said, in the pedigrees or in the papers of the animal, depending on what type of fiber does it have? And if you think this will come in the pre-purchase exams?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. So I don't know. So right now, currently, we don't have that individually feeding a mare based on what performance we want the offspring to do later in life. Usually we address that postnatally with that individual animal. Let's say they go into more anaerobic exercise. We're going to feed them a diet with starch in it. If they're going to stay predominantly aerobic, we're going to feed them mostly a fat-based diet. With that said, we don't know enough yet about how those different energy sources affect offspring later in life, whether starch is going to set them up for insulin resistance when they're in the uterine environment or not. And that's certainly a question that we need to ask and find out, and that would progress us to the point of potentially being able to target maternal diet based on what we want those offspring to be used for in the future. So I think we could get there, but right now we're still just feeding mares to meet nutrient requirements and then addressing that specific use of the animal in their postnatal life. Does that answer the complete question, or was there another piece to that as well?
No, it answers perfectly, and I appreciate your answer. Dr. Wayne, was there a higher prevalence of any specific region where you found the orthopedic abnormalities, whether it was tarsus or the digit, or you found them in the stifle in the cohort of horses that you looked at from the Criollo breed?
Yeah, it's a big problem here, and year by year increase the numbers of these problems. For our concepts, we think the first problem is the fat or the overweight in the mares, and in the first months of the foal's life, the increase to energy and low protein, and the minerals low too. And for other hand, some foals go to the training so young like 4 or 6 months, because we have a competition in the first year in Criollo's tournée in Brazil. And we, in the last years, check for specific lines and genetic lines increase these problems, like the others breeders. We studied this because when you check the foals that had a problem, you look the paper and we see a stallion or a specific group of the mares. It's a one problem, but the main problem we think is nutritional and the management these foals in the first months of the age.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Wayne. Dr. Bradbury, a couple of final questions that are pretty interesting from our audience. The first one is if you correlated the muscle fibers that were developed in the foals with the muscle fibers the mare had, and if you found any correlation between that.
That's a great question. No, we did not do that. Certainly something that we could easily do in future studies. The challenge with that is if those mares had a performance career of some kind, there would be some, it wouldn't be comparing that mare's, what her, trying to think of how to word this, what her skeletal muscle looked like when she was born. It's kind of a genetic and developmental piece. So she would have a lot of environmental factors throughout her life that would then influence what her skeletal muscle looks like. But with that said, it would be interesting to see during that time of gestation what her skeletal muscle status is compared to that of her newborn foal. And that's not something we have done yet. And I'm not familiar with any other research out there that has done that either. But it would certainly be an interesting question to ask.
And related to this question, are you going to look at in years to come what the foals that you looked at right now will be doing in the future as performance animals?
Yeah, so we won't take the foals from that original study that I presented data from to their performance careers. However, that is a long-term goal of mine to develop such a study where we would have similar dietary treatments. We would take similar samples at that neonatal time point, and then at other time points during those critical stages of growth and development, weaning time, around their yearling time, as they enter their training, and then enter into the more intense performance demanding aspects, and even that pubertal time as well, when animals may start to enter into those reproductive herds. So yes, that is a long-term goal of mine in my research lab.
Perfect. We'll be very looking forward to your results in that area. And a final question for you. What would you think would be the best recommendation for the general practitioner when looking at the mare to estimate what the requirements of the fetus are being met? So if we keep going with the thought that if the mare is well taken care of and looks okay, the fetus is going to be well taken care of as well.
Yeah, so best way to manage those mares is to know what stage of gestation she's in. If she's in first or second trimester, and if she still is in first or second trimester, you have a little bit of time to plan as she goes towards the third trimester gestation, where her nutrient requirements start to increase. And acquiring feeds and stuff, should you need to do that, depending on what region you're in and what resources are available, and starting to add those into the diet at that time of third trimester gestation, and monitoring her using body condition scoring systems. And I know that body condition scoring is very subjective. What I may call a body condition score of 6, somebody else may call a 5.5, or so on. So it's certainly not a perfect system, but also most producers don't have a body weight scale available to them, and body weight's challenging as well. So assessing nutritional status of gestating mares is challenging. And using that body condition scoring system has been the gold standard for quite some time, and can still be used for that purpose. But with that said, if a mare is in that body condition score range of 6, typically the fetus is not going to suffer if we're meeting her nutrient requirements. I say that, and the mares on that research study that received 40% nutrients above that of their requirements were overfed. They actually never became what we would consider truly obese during that third trimester gestation. They did increase in body condition score and they did increase in body weight, but they never reached a body condition score of 7 or even 7.5. So interestingly, just overfeeding these mares, even without them crossing that threshold to what we would consider obese, still had a negative effect on the fetuses. So that's where it becomes challenging for veterinarians, where we do need to monitor their nutritional status from a body condition score perspective, but we also need to be familiar with what's in that diet and what we're giving to those mares to make sure that we are not in excess or in restriction with what we're supplying. So it makes it a two-step deal: body condition scoring and assessing that nutritional program.
Thank you very much, Dr. Bradbury. Here in Latin America, we culturally like heavy horses. So all the information that you've given us has been very well appreciated by everybody in the chat.
Great.
So let me just finish with Dr. Wayne, and then we'll finish the chat. Dr. Wayne, I have a couple questions from our listeners which are going to be our final questions. The first one is if you have found that the Criollo breed has any relation to having any orthopedic diseases that can be prevented by reducing the feed. As you said, it's something that is very common to have heavy mares that will continue to have foals with problems. And if you have changed the area where they live, if they improve those outcomes with their foals.
This problem is a Brazilian breeds like a Criollo, Manga Larga, Campolina. It's the same origin of this horse. For us, that horse in natural selection in the past, learning use the best way of the feed, or the best feed under quality that the horse had in the past. And nowadays, the breeders put this horse in the good grass in a field, put in a barn, and offer a lot of sweet feeds. And we have a problem in all of these horse in Brazil, like a Criollo and Manga Larga. And the management for the mares and the foals to the training, that foals receive a lot of nutrients to training because a health part of the competition was conformation, and the judges like the fat horse, and the breeders put horse in fat condition. It's a big problem, and in many states in the Brazil we have the same problem. And the Manga Larga, in the other Brazilian breed, it's so common in competitions. We see a lot of foals in fat conditions. And then for your question, when you put these mares in poor condition, that mares maintain for 1 or 2 years in the same high condition like easy keepers, because in this condition, when we put the mares in poor condition, we understand who mares is stay in the same condition, and the easy keepers, and the others lost the weight. But in many conditions, we need 1, 2, or 3 years to these mares change the fat for a normal body score system or condition like a 6 or 5.
Perfect. And one last question. Would you consider that the Criollo breeds in Brazil have a higher incidence of orthopedic problems than a warm blood or another horse from another that you would import into Brazil, for example?
Yeah, we compare for the other horse, but in the first concept, the Criollo's horse had a low problems when compared con other warm bloods. Like a angular deviation, we checked the foals in the first month, and we had like 70 or 80% the light deviations or the moderate deviations. And when you check it one more time, these foals close to 6 or 8 months, like a 80% increase the situation, and we have had only 10 or 15% the problem. It's a natural curve. I think it's cool for this the Criollo breed. And you have a problem about OCD. It's a problem, and the stifle OCD and a tarsus OCD. In these numbers increase in the last years, but we think it's occur because the sweet food increasing in this horse management.
Perfect. Well, with these questions, we are out of time. I appreciate Dr. Bradbury, Dr. Wayne, the time that you've given us. In the name of the committee of this Congress, I appreciate and thank you for giving us all the knowledge that you've given us. And we'll be certainly following your papers and your careers in the future, because they have certainly been very interesting and have given us a big help in our general knowledge of these areas. So I appreciate you, and I give back the process to the committee so we can continue the second session. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. If you have more questions, send my email. Feel free to send me. Thank you.
For me as well. Thank you.
Thank you to you too.